I'd been into caving for a few years when this happened. I wasn't into anything extreme though. I wasn't one of those guys who squeezes themselves into gaps the size of their chest just for bragging rights. I'm stupid, but I'm not an idiot. But I did like exploring places that weren't mapped out or polished for tourists. Most of the time it meant poking around old quarries, shallow cave mouths, or mines with a group of friends. But as the years went by, I got more comfortable with being underground, and that meant that I also got more careless. I started going out alone, which means I was ignoring the most important rule that everyone drills into you: never cave solo. I told myself that I would be fine as long as I brought enough batteries and marked my way in. That arrogance nearly got me killed, or worse. This was in Slovenia in 2014. I'd been staying with a friend in Ljubljana for a few weeks, which is the capital city. One night, we were drinking with the locals when someone mentioned a cave system outside a small village near Postojna. It wasn't part of the big tourist cave there that everyone knows about. It was apparently some side network that ran into the same karst formations. According to the guy, the locals did not go into it because people had disappeared before. He laughed when he said it, like it was just some superstition, but he would also not tell me exactly where it was until I pressed him. He finally gave me some rough directions and made me promise not to say his name if I told anyone about it. In fact, he straight up told me not to tell anyone else. It just seemed really sketchy, and I had no idea why him sharing it was such a bad thing, especially if he thought it was just superstition, and it's not like he would get in trouble for telling me. I should have left it at that, but the way he acted made me a lot more curious than I initially was. A couple of days later, I borrowed my friend's car and drove out there with gear. The cave entrance was exactly where the guy said it would be. It was a low opening hidden by overgrowth at the edge of the forest. It was about 1 kilometer off a gravel road, but it did not look like much. It was just a hole in the limestone barely big enough to crawl into. Once you were past the entrance though, it opened up into a proper passage. There were no markers, no graffiti, and no sign that anyone had been down there in a long time. That was the first thing that put me on edge. Even in obscure caves, you usually see evidence of people. This one felt untouched though. I had 3 lights on me, spare batteries, chalk for marking, and a pack with water and a snack. The first stretch was easy going. It was just a narrow corridor that gradually sloped downward. Place was dry, and the footing was not precarious. The air was cool too, and I had no problems. I marked arrows on the wall as I went along. After about 20 minutes, the corridor split into 2 passages. The left one was tight and low. The right one sloped down more steeply. I chose the right passage. Not for any particular reason. I just picked at random. I suppose random isn't ever a thing that should be involved with a hobby as dangerous as this. Like I said, I was a little stupid. As I went deeper, I noticed the air getting heavy. Not enough to choke, but it was pretty stale. At one point, my headlamp caught something carved into the rock. It wasn't graffiti or anything, but what looked like deliberate marks. They were faint and partially eroded, but I could make out like a spiral pattern. No idea what it was about. Maybe just kids screwing around in the past. I kept going, deeper still, until I reached a chamber where the ceiling rose higher and the floor dipped into a shallow pit. That is where I smelled the reek of rot for the first time. I thought maybe an animal had fallen in and died, so I climbed down to check. My boots crunched on bones, dozens and dozens of them. Some were clearly animals, sheep or goat maybe, but mixed in were others I could not place. Long bones, ribs, vertebrae. I crouched and aimed my headlamp closer, and my stomach turned. A skull stared back at me. Human, no doubt about it, the teeth still intact. The bones weren't neatly piled, but just scattered everywhere. Some were broken in places, and others looked to have been chewed on. I told myself I was leaving right then, but before I could climb out of the pit, I heard something further down the passage. It was a sound like water dripping. I killed my light and crouched down low. My anxiety was going crazy at this point. It sounded like something was moving. I heard something like dragging and a stone scraping, I think. I waited for what felt like forever. Eventually the sound faded, so I flicked my light back on and scrambled out of the pit. I almost dropped my flashlight, I was shaking so badly. I started heading back the way I came. I was being sure to follow my chalk marks because I did not want to get lost and stay down here for even a second longer. At one point, I reached a spot I did not recognize. The markings on the wall were not mine. They were just over scratches, but I know I did not make them and that this was not the way. That's when I heard something again. Something exhaling. It sounded like it was full of mucus. I still had my headlamp on, and I caught a glimpse of something. It looked like something pale against the black rock. The limbs looked insanely long, but I only caught a glimpse. It could have just been my brain filling in gaps that weren't there. The next 10 minutes were a blur of panic. I don't remember how many times I slept, or how often I turned my head to shine the light behind me. I was just certain that I would see something right there in front of me, ready to get me. My panic brain was making me see things, because I swear at one point, I saw a shape crawling along the ceiling like a spider. Not a little dinky one, but one way bigger than should have been possible. I'm talking the size of a small dog. I was obviously just seeing things though. I had to force myself to stop turning and looking, and just make myself run. When I finally saw daylight ahead, I didn't even care that I'd lost track of my chalk marks and taken a different route out. I clawed my way through the entrance and collapsed in the grass outside. I just lay there, gasping for fresh air. My gear was torn up and my arms and legs were bleeding from the scrapes. I didn't feel any of the pain of it at the time, due to the adrenaline. I drove back to Ljubljana in a daze and dumped the gear in my friend's shed. I just tried to act normal for the rest of the trip. I never told him or anyone else until years later. I thought about reporting it, but how do you even explain that? Hey, there's a cave full of bones and maybe a thing living in there. Best case, they would think I was a lunatic. So, yeah, I don't really know how to explain what I experienced. Was it all just my imagination? I used to do a lot of amateur caving. It was never anything hardcore like I'd see some of these other people do. I never mapped out systems or joined groups. I just liked going into holes and seeing where they went. I wasn't squeezing myself into ridiculously small spaces just to feel some thrill in my shitty life. Sometimes I would find marked caves, sometimes ones that weren't on any map, but locals knew about. A few years back I was in Slovakia visiting a friend, and his uncle mentioned a cave on his land. He said that nobody went into it because it had bad air, and that animals would avoid it completely. That was enough for me to want to check it out, which I guess sounds really stupid. The entrance was not impressive. It was just a small crack in an outcrop, barely big enough to squeeze into. I went in with a helmet, a lamp, a rope, and all of the usual kit. There was obviously no phone service down there, but I left word with my buddy that I was heading in, so someone would know if I did not come back. The cave started as a low crawl. I had to go on my belly and elbows for maybe 20 minutes before it widened into a narrow passage. After that, I could walk hunched over. There wasn't really anything unusual that I could see. My lamp would fog sometimes when I breathed too hard. The air did not feel dangerous, but just really thick and heavy, which made breathing a task. I pushed deeper than I probably should have. The floor kept slipping down and the passages got tighter. At one point I had to take my pack off and push it ahead of me to squeeze through a crack. When I came out the other side, I ended up in a small chamber that was maybe 10 feet across. It wasn't very tall at all. The walls were smooth on one side and jagged on the other. It was strange. It kinda looked like water had carved half and the rest had just broken naturally. And that's where I saw it. At first I thought it was just a weird shadow. My lamp being passed over the jagged wall, and there was something sticking out of it. This thing was pale and round. When I moved closer I realized it was a hand. Like a real fucking hand. Not just an outcropping of stone, but an actual human hand, kinda. It didn't exactly look normal. It looked swollen. The skin stretched. It was shiny, but definitely human. The fingers were crooked, like they'd been forced into that position. I froze and just stared for a while, trying to make sense of it. The hand was attached to an arm, that disappeared into the rock, and when I moved the beam further, I could see part of a face pressed against the stone. It looked like someone had been shoved into a narrow fissure and could not get out. The skin was greyish and the eye socket was sunk deep. I thought it was a body wedged in there, maybe decades old. Maybe it was some caver who got stuck and died. I knew that didn't make sense, that the body would have decomposed and wouldn't look like this. Still, I had to convince myself of something to stay calm. Then the eye fucking opened. It shot open and I nearly screamed right then and there. It caught the reflection from my lamp. Then I heard a wet sound, like someone trying to breathe through a clogged throat. The fingers on my hands started twitching. It was just a slow little flex like they were struggling to move. My chest went cold. All I could do was stand stock still and let out a whispered, "What the fuck?" I can't explain it, except that every instinct in me screamed to get out. I just backed away, grabbed my pack, and crawled out of there as fast as I could. I scraped myself raw on the stone trying to get back through the crack, but I did not care. The whole way out, I kept expecting to hear something following me. When I got back to daylight, I sat outside the cave entrance for a long time, trying to convince myself I imagined it, that maybe it was just rock that looked like a hand and face. Maybe the eye opening was a trick of my lamp. I did not tell my buddy or his uncles the details. I just said that the air was bad, like they had warned, and I did not go far. I have never gone back. What the fuck did I see there? That's not actually like a thing, right? It's not actually possible for that to be a real person or anything. But if not, what the fuck did I see in there? I should have known better. I had every sign waving right in front of my face. I had every opportunity to back out and say nope, but I didn't. I've only got myself to blame. This all centers around my friend for who the purpose of the story we will call S. S was very bold. We both came from poor struggling families and were bullied pretty heavily for being the weird kids. I think we bonded over our shared misery. Despite that, S always stood up for herself. She was loud. She let everyone know exactly what she thought of them, and she was not afraid to hurt someone's feelings. I was, much the opposite. I lived in a shell and was very timid. We coped with the torment in different ways. While our friendship was short, we were extremely close. I was always at her apartment. Her family loved me, and I always felt incredibly welcome there. They were the busy type. They were constantly working. They would always be leaving S and I to fend for ourselves most of the time, though we didn't really mind. Her apartment, on the other hand, was not so welcoming. From the beginning, I knew that something was off. The first incident was the boxes. S and I went downstairs to get something to eat, only to find a strange reassortment of some boxes that were on the counter. It sounds ridiculous, but 3 boxes sat lined up in front of the microwave, spaced evenly apart. We gave each other a skeptical look. Were these here before?" she asked. "I don't remember them being like that, but it could have been your family unloading groceries or something," I responded. We shrugged it off, got something to eat, and went back upstairs. Soon, the bruises came. It seemed like every day, S would have a new bruise pop up. I was worried at first that it could be her family harming her, but she insisted that she had no idea where they came from. I know her family very well, and I don't think they would ever do something like that. She was not the clumsy type either, and didn't do any sports, so we truly had no clue as to why she had them. I mentioned before that S lived in an apartment. She lived there with her mother and stepfather. The voices are what we noticed next. When nobody was home, we could have sworn that we heard voices coming from downstairs. Because it was an apartment, we tried to blame it on her neighbors. There were no neighbors on one side, and on the other side lived a sweet old woman. I don't know if I ever heard her voice coming through any of the walls. The voices did not sound like that old woman. S had me come over one day after school. She had not seemed like her normal self. I was anxious to know what was wrong. We hurriedly walked to her apartment. When we got to her room, she immediately pulled up her shirt and showed me her back. Against her skin sat 3 angry red scratches. They looked as though something had slowly scraped its claws across her back. My eyes widened and we stared at one another. I looked with shock. S looked with fear. How did you get those? Her eyes glimmered with tears. I don't know, but they hurt, she said. For the first time, we discussed the weird crap that had been going on. S then confided in me that her mom was a bit of a religious nut. I knew she was a Christian, but until then, I did not understand the extent of how deep it ran. She told me that when she first moved into the apartment, her mom went around with holy water and drew crosses over each bed and doorway. Additionally, she had placed a small crucifix over each bed. Warning bells began ringing in my head, but unfortunately, we were powerless. It all came to a head one afternoon. S and I decided to go hiking the local mountains called the Pinnacles. The Pinnacles has 3 trails: the East, the West, and Indian Fort Trail. The East is mostly flat, but it is the longest. It's the easiest trail to take and is the most traveled. The majority of the landmarks are along this trail. The West is the next most traveled, but it is steeper, making it more difficult to hike. It's the second longest trail. The Indian Fort Trail almost feels like rock climbing because it is so steep, but it is very short. S and I decided to take the East as both of us were on the larger side and hiking the other trails was harder for us. The Pinnacles closes its gates when night falls. I should have mentioned earlier that this all took place during the spring of 2016. Dusk came around 7:40 p.m. and it was completely dark by 8 o'clock. We started the hike at 3:30 p.m. Unsurprisingly, we were slow. It took us half an hour just to get to the part of the trail where it splits. The sun was still high in the sky and foolishly we felt safe. Not soon after we took the East Trail, a hazy fog fell low to the ground. The sun became blocked by clouds that were rapidly closing in. We continued despite the fast-changing weather conditions. After hiking the East Trail for about an hour, rain began to fall. There were 2 landmarks with overhangs where we could seek shelter while we waited. One was called the Eagle's Nest, the other one, the Devil's Kitchen. I knew the East Trail like the back of my hand, and from our vantage point, we were roughly equidistant between the 2. The Devil's Kitchen is essentially a shallow cave, so we decided to head in there, as it had more coverage. By the time we got there we were soaked. The rain came harder and harder with seemingly no end. I could not tell you how long we waited. At one point, I pulled out my phone to check the time, only to find that it died. I found that extremely odd, as I had a fully charged battery when I left, and only used it to take pictures along the way. S's phone had died too. Technology is weird though, and anything could make it malfunction. Nevertheless, we were cold, shivering, and alone in the Devil's Kitchen while the rain just kept coming. It wasn't long before S and I heard branches breaking. We could not be sure that that's what we were hearing over the roar of the rain, but as the sound became louder and closer, we were positive that's what it was. We looked at each other and did not speak. The tension was palpable. Our eyes conveyed the same thing: terror. Once again we were helpless. Out of the haze a silhouette appeared and began to take form, a sort of shadow. I'd guess it stood at about 8 feet tall. I looked at S again and saw that she had her eyes closed. I wondered if she had seen the figure. Panic bubbled in my stomach. My breath came in rapid bursts as I watched the figure become clearer. What could I do? S and I were backed into a corner, and there was a stranger coming towards us. A stranger that stood unnaturally tall and emanated a frightening aura. I let out a whimper. There was no hiding there. There was no running. I followed S and closed my eyes, not knowing what else to do. Maybe when I opened my brain, the thing would be gone. Fear flooded my brain. My heart pounded and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. After maybe 5 minutes, I decided that I would open my eyes. Slowly, with tears welling up, I opened them and screamed. Directly in front of my face was another one staring back at me. It was white as a sheet, with empty black pits for eyes. It had no nose and a small tear where I think its mouth should have been. The thing made no noise, no indication that it had moved at all, despite the fact that we heard branches breaking, that we fought, signaled its approach. Gnarled, bony fingers with nails like ice picks reached towards my face, and a shaky, rattling breath escaped its mouth. I bolted. S was right behind me. I made a sort of thrusting and kicking motion as I moved forward, but did not connect with the body or anything for that matter. When we made it to the entrance of the cave, I made the cardinal error of looking back, but there was nothing. Regardless, we ran. We were not very fast, but we kept going. We did not stop until we reached the end of the trail, where the split is. S and I panted. We walked the rest of the way until we made it to a car. Thank God we weren't any later. Dusk had begun to fall, and soon it would be dark. I went with her back to her apartment and made the decision to stay the night. Nobody was home when we arrived. We went straight upstairs, changed our clothes, took turns showering, and went to sleep, utterly exhausted. At some point during the night, my eyes opened. I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor that S always drug in for me. I checked my phone that I'd put on the charger, and saw that it was 2 a.m. I was wondering what awakened me when I heard it, the door creaking ever so slightly open. I strained my eyes to try to see through the widening crack. I don't have my glasses on, and my vision is terrible, so it was hard. The door continued to widen, and eventually I saw it. The face. Its body was the blackest I've ever seen. So much so that it was outlined against the faint glow of moonlight beaming in through the curtains. My stomach dropped, and that all too familiar feeling of panic rose in my throat. My eyes darted around the room, catching on a glint of gold illuminated by the moonlight. The crucifix. It was, and I kid you not, upside down. I almost soiled myself out of fear. My eyes shot back to the thing, but it had vanished. I let out a rough, gravelly breath. What was this thing? Why was it following us? I looked over to S only to see that her eyes were wide open. She had seen it too. As per usual, we said nothing, only staring on in horror. The next morning I gathered my things and left. We did not talk about what had happened or what we saw. Our friendship ended soon after the incident for unrelated reasons, but it seems a cloud had hung over me since then. While I have never seen that face again, I can never hold a friendship or relationship. Everything I love disintegrates right in front of my eyes. I'm watching my life fall apart, and I can't help but think this thing has been following me all these years. It's been almost 4 years since this happened, and I still have nightmares, and I think about it every single day. Hey, hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you want to hear more, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment, because it lets YouTube know you like the content and helps more people to see these videos. My next big goal for the channel is 100,000 subscribers, and as a celebration, I will be doing a Q&A video once we hit that goal. Thank you, and back to the stories. I am an experienced but unlicensed cave diver. I've been diving hundreds of times over decades, but after what I saw, you will never get me into the water ever again. None of my diving buddies that I could tell about this believe me. They think I must have had nitrogen narcosis or something. I was part of an informal, under-the-radar group who basically cared more about YOLO than sitting on our asses and getting licenses and qualifications for every little thing. It killed the adventure for us to have these stupid organizations and other diving assholes on our case teaching us how to suck eggs and which way we're allowed to piss and when. We would get some basic paperwork so we can get gear without raising too many questions, but otherwise, we get it from our friends and light our asses off about where we are going and what we are doing. A friend and I were illegally diving in a cave, and he was killed by some kind of organism that I only saw briefly, but it looked like pig related. I had passed over it seconds earlier, felt a sudden current, and turned back to see the tentacles rising around my body. He didn't seem to notice it at first, because he was looking in the direction of his light, and it was surrounding him slowly. I tried to warn him, but at the last second, they closed around him, and I saw his momentary panic as in a split second, they dragged him down into a smaller crevice in the cave floor. The rapid action threw up sediment, reducing visibility after that, and I was so panicked, I used up an embarrassing amount of air just getting the fuck out of there. Divers are not supposed to panic, and I have stayed perfectly calm in innumerable critical situations, but this was so sudden, It triggered an animal instinct in me I'd never felt before. I wasn't even thinking, and I'm actually surprised I even kept my regulator in my mouth or managed to quell my panic enough during the ascent to avoid decompression illness. Caves are supposed to be devoid of larger or dangerous life forms due to a minimal food chain. How do you know he was killed? I momentarily saw the crevice he was dragged into, equipment and all, before water suddenly flowed back out, kicking up sediment. I also felt a sickening crack that I will never forget, which I believe was his body getting instantly broken, and maybe his metal equipment breaking some of the rock on the way through. It left me in no doubt about the amount of force involved. Just the speed alone was inhuman and characteristic of a predatory strike. I have no reason to believe he could have survived. I guess all that is what hit me so hard in the moment. The depth we were at and the cave system that we were in, there should not have been anything anywhere near that size or aggression. There was little current to speak of historically, and I still don't see how something like that could get enough food to survive on a long, mostly horizontal section of cave. I can only figure it is long-lived and lies dormant for long periods, waiting years, decades, centuries for something to come by. The fact I did not trigger it myself might be indicative of it being in a dormant state that it's not easily awoken from. The other weird thing is that it was the same dark color as the surrounding rock and same texture as the crap on the bottom, but as you will probably know, organisms that live that deep and without sunlight are usually devoid of any kind of pigmentation. That made me think that maybe it was some kind of giant octopus or cuttlefish or some related species, but I could see the spine bulbs on the end of the tentacles, which I have never seen before. It makes some kind of sense to slowly circle them around the back of its prey, and then when enough contact is made, hook it in somehow, that it just pulls straight down to a central point with maximum speed and force. I'm not sure what else does that, though, if anything on Earth. Name the cave, and GPS coordinates, or get the fuck out. The reason I don't is that, as I said, we were not supposed to be there, let alone that part of the cave system, and I haven't even been connected to that location or his disappearance. There is no body, and anyone I tell thinks I'm somehow delusional. I don't want his family or the cops thinking I murdered him or something like that, and I could not help him now. He would understand. I need to talk about it, but I can't really do so anywhere else. You guys know about cryptids and such. Has anyone else reported anything like this or know anything about it? What could it be? I'm not crazy, and I know I didn't have any kind of diving-related cognitive impairment at the time. I had the right mixtures, and no excess CO2 or anything like that. My equipment all checked out afterwards. If it had been something like that, my panic would have instantly made things worse, and probably killed me too. It was just due to my experience and having done this stuff so many times that I got back at all. I barely remember doing a lot of it, but I know I did on sheer muscle memory. I also would not want to send anyone down there looking for my buddy's body, or the creature, especially if they really did not believe me. They would not stand a chance, and God only knows how many there are in those caves or others. Since that day, I've been thinking about other divers who suddenly seem to go missing, even when with other people relatively close by. The sudden kicking up of sediment, attributed to panic, and bodies never found. I don't think they all happen that way. It can't be a coincidence. I figure maybe somebody saw something or thought they saw something at some point. Even if old reports you guys may have heard about. Maybe these creatures don't have to eat very often due to a very slow metabolism. So after eating a human, they don't react to others for years, and people just think the cave is safe. That is why I will never go back. You told your friends that your other friend got killed by a monster, and they didn't, tell his family. It's complicated. We are an informal group that is largely disconnected and anonymous to avoid liability in case of accidents. We help each other out with fake qualifications, contacts, under-the-counter deals, etc. We'd mostly keep it to small groups. I mostly dive with my buddy. Most of them don't know him personally or know he's involved, and he did some legit diving too. He just got a kick out of doing off-of-the-book stuff. When I told them about this, most knew who I was referring to by pseudonym at best or have every reason not to get personally involved. None of them know his family, that's for sure. All that obviously made convincing them of what happened a lot harder too. Not trying to be funny, but the best way I think I can describe it is it would be like some 2-bit street-level drug distributor trying to convince an entire organized crime syndicate that he just got beat up by Batman. And I don't mean to imply that what we were doing was that bad. The risk was to ourselves. We just didn't want people interfering with our choices. So the less everyone inside and outside knew, the better. Is he reported missing or something? Yes. He has been missing ever since, and it was reported by his family after a while because he used to go on trips for indeterminate periods and would lie about the details. Nobody knew where he was actually going. My family didn't know where I was going either. We had our phones, just in case, but disabled them before the final leg, just in case the authorities could pick them up and triangulate our location illegally diving at the cave. He did not bring his vehicle. I met him at a third location and then drove there directly. I almost turned on my phone and called someone, but frankly, I was in shock and could not even work out how I would even explain anything. I drove back alone. Later, it got harder for me to even consider reporting it to the cops, knowing how it looked. The second that I admitted I was the last person to see him alive, and with such a fantastic story, there would have been skepticism and endless questions, way beyond the repercussions for illegal diving. The police had no real clues, only the misleading information he told his family and a cold trail. There is nothing for them to go on and figure out the truth unless I tell them. I feel bad about his family never knowing, but I think it's best to leave everything where it is, which only leaves the creature. Of course I feel a responsibility to warn people about the danger, but when they don't believe you anyway, what can you do? It's like if Bigfoot posed a danger and you tried to warn people. Of course they're not going to listen. I am still trying to figure this out from the safety of dry land though. People who have gone missing in caves with no body found.